And welcome to BeyondPowerAndControl.com. It is a training resource for mental health professionals to learn all about working with victims and survivors of domestic violence. I'm Sybil Cummin, licensed professional counselor and approved clinical supervisor, and the creator of Beyond Power and Control. So I'm really excited today that I have Barbara Sheehan-Zeidler with me to talk about something I have been trying to find someone to talk with me about for a little while. So I am so amazingly excited, and she is going to provide so much insight into EMDR and domestic violence. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I enjoy listening to your other talks, and now I get to be a part of it. So thank you. These are passions of mine, both EMDR and being sensitive to people who have had that experience of domestic violence. So as Sybil said, I'm Barbara Sheehan-Zeidler. I I own and operate Creative and Caring Counseling in Littleton, Colorado. And we're going to have a conversation about EMDR with clients of domestic violence.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about, you are not just a practitioner of EMDR, you are a trainer and consultant as well.
I am a consultant, and I have my first advanced EMDR training coming up. So there are more coming in the future, but I am just beginning that path, and I'm super excited about it because I feel like it's important to share some information. So yeah, I provide consultation, whether it's general or for certification, and then some advanced trainings.
So that is exciting, as EMDR is really an exciting area right now where research keeps coming, and it really has shown really great efficacy with clients with trauma. And so really we're going to talk about some specifics and some specific things that we need to be really aware of when working with this specific population.
And we should clarify maybe, Sybil, that EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's a therapy that requires specialized training to do.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because we are really deep in the field, and so we know what that means. And what I'm really hoping for is that young clinicians, those that are just now learning in their master's level programs, that they will start to watch these videos and start learning this stuff as they're getting their education rather than farther out in their practice.
I think that's a brilliant idea. And so let's get this topic started.
Yeah, so can you really quickly, it might not be right, but kind of explain what is EMDR?
Sure. So as I said, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's EMDR therapy. And it initiated from Francine Shapiro with over 30 years of research. So it has excellent ratings. EMDR is a lens of looking at how a client presents to us and how we can help them to get to where they want to be. EMDR itself has 8 phases. A lot of times, maybe you've seen this too, a client will come in and say, I want that EMDR thing. I'm like, it's not just this, and I'll explain this in one quick second, but it's 8 phases, and we're going to talk about the importance of phases 1, 2, and 3. So what makes EMDR unique is that we have this intentional bilateral or dual attention stimulation. So we apply this back and forth experience with the intention that the client go into a pain point to help it reprocess and go from what we call maladaptive to adaptive. So that the trauma isn't just having relief, but all the way through resolve. We have a strong belief in neuroplasticity and the adaptive information processing, that we adapt in order to survive. But thank goodness for neuroplasticity, because we can change the wiring. Was that short?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that conversation about that neuroplasticity and us adapting. So when we're talking specifically about victims and survivors of domestic violence, they adapt really more than anyone I have ever worked with. They have to adapt to remain safe and sometimes alive.
Mhm.
And that sometimes that takes such a huge toll on them. So
Mhm.
then when they are out and they are safe, which we
Mhm.
can talk about that a little bit, but they are really stuck in those adaptations that have kept them safe and alive, but maybe
Absolutely.
they don't need them anymore.
Absolutely. That's where in the EMDR world, we might say maladaptive. Once upon a time, it was adaptive to say yes to everything, even when we wanted to say no. But then now saying yes to everything, I'm people pleasing, I'm in over my head. It is now maladaptive. And with EMDR therapy, we help take that and have it become an adaptive or updated neural network. So, yes, absolutely. It's amazing how we adapt to survive.
Yeah. And so the reason I've really been trying to find someone to have this discussion with me
Mhm.
is I work with a lot of clients. Half of my clientele are victims or survivors of domestic violence. And some of them have had experiences with EMDR,
Mhm.
and they haven't always been positive. And I
Yeah.
think, when we really process that and go through it, um, it is that they weren't actually safe enough to do it and to do the work. And so even though they had left the home, um, they were not safe. And so some of that can be maybe they're physically safe and no one's
Mhm.
going to beat them or hit them,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they're still dealing with their abusive partner through visitations with their children or
Mhm.
through the court systems, or maybe there still is threatening and harassing behavior. And
Mhm.
so I think this is why this is so, so important for us to discuss is best practices of EMDR so
Mhm.
that we are doing a service to these clients.
Mhm. And not a disservice. And just to add to that, safety, financially safe, emotionally safe, physically safe, sexually safe, and what would be another one?
Spiritually,
Yeah,
spiritual
spiritually
safety from
safe.
spiritual abuse.
So where is the client as they're, maybe no longer in that day-to-day environment, but where else are they, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, are there times when doing the reprocessing piece of EMDR is not advised?
And so the piece you're talking about, that is phase 4, I think, right? So you're talking about phase 4, the desensitization, which is what people often think is EMDR. This is where we're going in there with the bilateral and going into the pain point. So are there times when we don't go there? Oh, yes. There are plenty of times when we don't go there. And in Francine Shapiro's book, what chapter is it? 3, 4, chapter 4. She talks about those things. So as I'm sitting with a client and I'm assessing for them, what we're looking for is for the client to feel safe in the room. We didn't talk about trust, right?
Yeah.
So, right. So a client may not feel safe to trust. And how can we do therapy when there is maybe a hidden agenda or a blocking belief or not this earned trust? So before I ever approach this part of EMDR phase 4, we're slowing it down and having the client feel a sense of trust and safety in the room. And then court is happening sometimes, right?
Mhm.
So if a client is in the midst of court and court changes and battles, I'm not necessarily going to go back in time to what happened 5 years ago when in their face is this urgent crisis situation. I'm not going to take them there when this is the house is on fire right now. Does that make sense, Sybil, the way I'm saying it?
Absolutely. Yes. And there are so many court and legal situations that may come up. So sometimes they might be having to testify in a criminal case,
Mm-hmm.
and that piece, which is really very frightening.
Yeah.
And then many times, a lot of my clients are in court over and over and over with their abusive partner in
Yeah.
family court, um, really trying to figure out the best situation for the children. Sometimes it's about finances and the divorce and things, but they are in court often. And so making sure that we really, are acknowledging and really asking those questions about what they're going through in the now, so that we can see, is it just they're perceiving that things are not safe, or are they really dealing with some emotional safety issues?
Yes, and that's where checking in each time the client comes in. Saw the client over here and things were okay. So maybe the treatment plan or the idea is, hey, let's go ahead and target that moment. And if I neglect to check in this week, because things can change so very, very quickly, and if I don't check in and I go ahead and I process that target, I may be doing a disservice to my client because, oops, she has court tomorrow and there's a whole bunch of other stuff happening. So it's important, I think, to check in weekly with how are things, and maybe even asking those questions that the client may neglect to talk about. Like, how are those texts? Are they stopping? Are they still happening? Did you get the children into their therapy yet? These very, very pressing issues. So I do slow down with my clients that have that experience.
Yeah, and so most people do think of EMDR as the eye movement piece, or the light bar, or the squeezing the buzzers. But there are other parts of EMDR.
There are 8 phases.
And so what kinds of things can you do with these clients that that desensitization piece is not appropriate for, but that doesn't mean we just don't see them? What steps can be done?
I love, love, love that question, because as we're, the whole thing is reprocessing. Phase 4 is the desensitizing. What I love about that question is through that EMDR therapy lens, we can still help. So things that we can do in that, so phase 1 is history and treatment, and then phase 2 is preparation. And here's where we can maybe begin to hear where the client's, symptoms are, where their negative beliefs are. And maybe here we can install some positivity. So with EMDR, we go at a certain pace when we're in the desensitization, okay? But when we're over here in history, treatment, and prep, we're going to go at a different pace. And the reason is because we're installing positivity. So we can install things. We don't want to activate things, but we can install things. So in that part of EMDR therapy, we can do so very, very, very much. Other things we can do is maybe what we call a future template. So we're not, again, desensitizing the history, but I might be sitting with client Sally Sue and say, tomorrow, Sally Sue, you have court. How would you like to imagine going to court? And we install how she would like to be. Calm, confident, clear-spoken. It's okay to imagine going forward. So there are many things that we can do to build up that client's ego strength and sense of self and self-agency. And it all will help to eventually get to that desensitization phase 4.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great explanation, because it's not, black or white, all for naught.
There's a class in EMDR called the art of EMDR, because it really is, as much as it is a science, there is an art. Like in any therapy, there is such a subtlety, such an art to it as well. And that's why getting your basic training and advanced training and consultations can be profound to your clinical practice.
Absolutely. So if you had a new clinician, new to EMDR, they just finished their basic training. They're so excited, right? Like when I finish a training, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this with every client. This is going to work with everyone that comes in my office, and I love it. So what would you advise them? How would you advise them specifically with a survivor of domestic violence?
I want to get into the persona like you did. So I might say to the client, you are so enthusiastic, my consultee, or my colleague, you are so enthusiastic about it. This is wonderful. And knowing that you want to be of best service to your client, let's not forget the very important 8 phases: history,
Mhm.
prep, treatment planning, assessment, and you know, go over checklists. You know, be sure that you know where the client is. So I would ask them to slow down and maybe share one of my what I kindly call my major learning points, which
Okay.
was when it went horribly wrong, you know, about 9 years ago. I'm so grateful for this client because I forged forward when I should have paced with the client. First and
Mhm.
foremost, attune with the client and then pace with the client. And when we don't do that as clinicians, what is happening in the room? So I would go over the very, very basics: history, treatment plan, and preparation, as well as invite them to remember what domestic violence, people who have endured that and have survived that, what other underlying issues might be at play that you're not really seeing. Does that make sense? Like, check in for the people pleasing, because I've had clients too who just continually tell me yes, 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 because they
Mhm.
were afraid to tell me no.
Yeah, and specifically with this clientele, they will have a range of experiences with professionals.
Mm,
Unfortunately,
true.
we are not trained in domestic violence at all at the graduate level, really.
No.
Um, and so there is kind of a lack of education. And so they have had experiences with law enforcement that might be negative. They have had experiences with child protection that might be negative. They may have had experiences with other therapists that might be negative. And so they are going to be testing those waters.
Good
They
point.
are not going to always share the truths with you.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going to see what can you manage, what is your
Mm-hmm.
reaction going to
Mm-hmm.
be.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so some of that could be just, yes ma'am, because if the therapist gives a report to child protection that they are compliant and
Right.
participating in therapy,
Right.
that will make an influence.
Right.
And we have to do what's in the best interest of our client.
We're this. So all of that, which comes back to having earned trust, isn't it? You know, an important thing when trust is broken, how it can be an earned experience. And that is, again, attuning and pacing to the client, and really paying attention to the subtleties, to all the nonverbals, to the little nuances about that. And maybe even using yourself in the room. Wow, my heart's beating really fast right now. What's coming up for you? Helping them have step into courage with words and honesty. I
Mhm.
know I have invited clients to tell me no, like something silly. I'd say, "Hi, could you pass me the tissue box?" And the instructions are, "Tell me no," because it's
Mhm.
safe, it's silly, it's fun, but wow, what gets activated with that? And then I know I have an EMDR moment because of that experience.
Yeah, and this reminds me of something that you had said to me that I really, really liked
Oh,
because these clients, they may never be fully safe, unfortunately. If they have children, until that child is 18,
yeah,
they may have to have contact with their abuser and then some, right? You don't stop being a mom when
right.
your kids, are 19 years old.
Mhm.
But something you said to me is that sometimes it is safe to be safe.
Oh, yes.
So, how do you use that, or how can clinicians watching this
Yeah.
use that with this population?
Yeah. So let me just pause. I'm remembering now. Yeah, that's a big one. Um, how to use that. So with that EMDR therapy lens, that might be over here in my prep stage where I'm just testing the waters with them to see where their resiliency is and where their pushback is, where their belief system is. It's like, sure, Barbara, I know it's sometimes safe to be safe, but I'm never going to believe that. I'm never going to feel that. So we have this
Mhm.
huge disconnect between cognition and felt sense or belief system. So I use it for assessment. I'm using it maybe as an installation. Maybe the client has gone far enough where they want to believe sometimes it's safe for me to feel safe now. And boy, just even as I say that, can you even feel the power of that?
Mhm.
If you've had a story of threat and danger, maybe since the crib, right? So
Right.
it's a really profound, almost sacred or spiritual moment when a client begins to believe it. So using it all along the way as a form of assessment, resiliency, or maybe installation. Installation meaning we've done the reprocessing, the
Mhm.
desensitizing, and we're putting in the positivity now instead of that maladaptive, the adaptive.
Yeah, I just really liked it, stood out to me as being
Oh,
really powerful that a lot of my clients, they leave, I open the door to my office and they're back in reality, and there is a possibility they will be physically injured, threatened, something's going to happen just
yeah,
based on their history.
yeah.
And yet when they're in my office, doors are closed, they're
Mhm,
comfy on my couch,
mhm,
they are safe and they feel safe and they can do some of that work that
mhm.
we do hopefully at some point get to do with them.
Yeah,
Sometimes that resourcing and skill building takes years with some
such
of
a long
my clients,
time. Such a
and
long time. Yeah.
we and that is okay. And so I think if I'm when I'm supervising clinicians and they feel like, gosh, we're just not getting anywhere, we can't do the trauma work,
Hmm.
you're doing it, you're
Yeah,
doing
absolutely. When I have, when I experience that or my colleagues share that, I'm like, what's that saying about me? Like,
it. Hmm.
because again, attunement and pacing. If we outpace or misattune, we are undoing all the good work. So I look back to the therapist, to myself, when I go into that little moment of time, because attunement and pacing leads the way to where to go.
Right. And definitely that client-led,
Yes,
victims of domestic violence don't get to make choices,
very important to
and
get the
they
voice.
don't trust
Mhm.
their decisions and their intuition. They've been taught that that's all wrong. And so really us giving them that power of, we are trusting you
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
lead us in this session.
Mhm.
Yes, will we push when we feel like we can push?
Oh yeah.
Yes, but really it is your choices that we are going to listen to.
Mhm.
And so I think that that paired along with whatever trauma modality you use,
Mhm. Mhm.
you are making progress, whether you're doing the reprocessing of a narrative or desensitization or any of that.
Mhm.
We are still doing the work.
We are definitely still doing the work because the work is the reparative relationship. I'm here for you, and I will hold what's happening for you, and I will be your witness and your guide. I don't know what the right word is, but I'll
Mhm.
ask you questions. I'll gently push because that's my role in your life. And if we push too hard, too fast, because I want to get to this, what's that about? Is that in
Yeah.
the client's best interest, or did the clinician get overly enthusiastic and sort of misattuned to the moment? You
Right.
know,
I just bought my light bar. I bought my new light bar and I just want to use my light bar.
I know.
And guess what? You might not get to use your light bar right now.
Might not, and that's okay because when you're, an effective therapist, you're going to have time. The time will come, all in good and right timing. It's very important we stay sensitive day by day, especially clients that are still living in chaos. Maybe not this physical danger, everyday danger, but it's still chaotic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, attending to that and noticing what do they need in this moment. So maybe we're just going to do a gentle install or a butterfly tap. Maybe it's just noticed, just going
Mm-hmm.
to be, I can take a deep breath and feel safe in my body right now. Hoorah, that's great. That's great considering where they're coming from.
Yeah. And so we're not measuring our effectiveness
Mm-hmm.
by where your client is at.
No, no. I like how you say that. I'm just letting that sink in over here.
Mm-hmm.
And what's popping up is measuring effectiveness. Do they come back? Do they get more
Yeah.
comfortable and more trusting? Do they refer people? Our effectiveness is so many other ways than did I get to this? No. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So yeah, I do really hope. I am an advocate for getting as much training as you can. So if EMDR is your method of working,
Mhm.
get as much training and consultation as you can.
Mhm.
Um, I am hopefully working on this piece of educating mental health clinicians on domestic violence
Mhm.
and getting all of that information. And so I did, and it will be available to download on beyondpowerandcontrol.com. It is a checklist that is specific to working with domestic violence victims and survivors. I've done some research on EMDR. I am not EMDR trained. I hire people to do that because it's a little bit different than the way I work.
Mhm.
Um, but so I've looked and seen some of the checklists that are out there. I do have that book, the initial Shapiro book,
Oh.
so that I can know what the heck I'm talking about. And but there's not really anything specific about domestic violence. And so I have created, again, a checklist that is downloadable. It will be on the website. Just that daily check-in when you're with your clients. Is any of this going on? Do they have basic needs and safety and stability there? Do they have physical safety, psychological safety, and do they have safe attachment figures?
Yeah.
And so that will be available for download, free for you all on the website. Do you have any last thoughts about our discussion?
Oh, what a gift you're giving the community for free. So number one, what a gift you're giving the community for free. And thank you for that. And thank you for bringing this attention. And thank you for inviting me in to talk about two of the things I'm passionate and sensitive to. And I encourage people to find their way, whether it's with EMDR therapy or another modality, because trauma work has some specifics, and working with people who have a history of domestic violence have an even more, in my opinion, tender area to attend to. But thank you, Sybil. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope somebody gained something from this.
I am positive they will, and thank you so much. I finally found some of my answers.
Oh, yay!
Yay.
I'm just around the corner.
Yeah, so yeah, if you have any more questions or anything, where can they reach you if they have EMDR specific questions?
Thank you. So again, Barbara Sheehan-Zeidler, licensed professional counselor, Littleton, Colorado. And my business is called Creative and Caring Counseling.com. So any of those ways, I'm on Psychology Today, and I'm pretty findable on the internet, it seems. And I would be delighted to field any questions or for any more resources that anybody would like, okay?
Well, thank you so much. And you can always reach me at beyondpowerandcontrol.com. And yeah, thank you so much for watching.
Yay, we did this. Thanks, Sybil.